I don't know if you've noticed, but my hair, it's getting quite long. Just... Now that I've drawn you in with that rather clearly, deliberately ambiguous video title, I would like to specify that in this video we're going to be talking about the potential pros and cons to trimming dreadlocks shorter, not all the way off. So, first off, two things I want to get out of the way. Firstly, dreadlocks are always growing. The longer you have your dreads, the longer they're going to become. And two, yes, you can trim them should they grow to a length that you find impractical, unmanageable, unwieldy. I have in fact trimmed my dreadlocks several times over the dread's lifetime, and that's why if you try and look back through any of my older pictures and try and use the hair length as an indication of when the picture was taken, you're gonna have a bad time because the hair length jumps about pretty wildly, but I'm just keeping you on your toes. Cool, so while dreadlocks do grow and can be trimmed like regular hair, unlike regular hair, you often find that you need to justify the trimming both to yourself and to others. I kind of find that people who are new to dreadlocks have this view that they're going to grow their dreadlocks forever and ever, and then people who've had them for longer, they start to see the potential upsides of keeping them trimmed to a manageable length. It's not true in all cases, but it seems to be often the case. So I'm going to list some of the pros and cons to trimming your dreads to a particular length, and they're like pros and cons as I see them. So let's start off with the cons, the downsides, the negatives, why you may not want to trim your hair. So dreadlocks grow really slowly. Really slowly. If you decide to trim your dreadlocks now, you've got to be pretty certain of that decision because you're going to be living with it for like ever. If you change your mind and decide, actually no, I want my dreadlocks back to the original length, it can take potentially a very, very long time for them to regain that length depending on how much you trimmed, and they will never get back to the length that they would have been if you'd have never trimmed them. I find myself in this situation whereby I've had my hair for 9 years, but they're never now going to be like 9 years long because I've trimmed them so many times, so I don't really know how long they are. They're just as long as I have them, but when I say I've had them for 9 years, it becomes a bit like I have to add in, but also they would be longer than this. Leading on from dreadlock length as a practical thing is dreadlock length as seen as time committed. So dreadlock length is often sort of perceived as being hand in hand with dreadlock age. The longer you have them, the longer they'll grow. And the longer you've had them, the more committed you must therefore be to growing dreadlocks. And therefore, the longer you've had them, the more committed you are, the more experience you must have in dreadlocks. So you kind of get more authority, especially if you're making things like YouTube videos. If I had really short dreadlocks, I don't feel that as many people would watch me because they might not trust quite so much of what I'm saying, because like, he's had them a long time. He must know what he's talking about. He must know what he's talking about. I try to know what I'm talking about. So I've benefited from sort of the respected experience that comes along with having longer dreads. I'm sure many others have too. If you're going to trim your dreads, you have to be prepared for potentially being viewed slightly differently. Bit of an opinionated one next, but long dreadlocks to a lot of people just straight up look better. I feel that I'm going to get a lot of agreement in that area from the comment section below. Let me know if that's of your opinion too, but just like long dreads are cooler, and I'll leave it at that. And my last downside, which is a bit more erring on the practical, is that if you do decide to trim your dreadlocks and the dreads aren't fully mature, this is not always going to be relevant for most people because most people will have had their dreadlocks for quite a long time before they get to a length where they consider trimming. But if your dreads are still on the softer side and you decide to trim, then the new ends, if they're not like totally mature where the new end is made, they can start to fray and unravel and unlock, and you start to lose more length than you'd cut. And that's just sort of a practical thing that you need to bear in mind should you decide that you're going to trim them. Okay, so why would anyone want to trim their dreadlocks? As I said, some people that are new to dreads might find it harder to see the potential upsides. Those who've been at it a little bit longer start to potentially come around. But here are some of the positives that I can see to keeping your dreadlocks trimmed to a certain length. They're all around more manageable. That's straight up less dread to deal with. There's less overall volume that you need to wash and that you need to dry. There's less dreadlock to soak up water, and there's less dread that water needs to like soak and drip out through. So the washing and drying process can be so much faster. And for a lot of people, the biggest downside to having dreadlocks is how long it takes to wash and dry them. And so the idea that you can maybe just trim them a bit shorter and that washing and drying becomes so noticeably easier, that has definitely got its appeal. Similarly, less dread to wash and dry, less dread to maintain. If you're particular about your dreadlock maintenance, the longer your dreads get, you may start to notice that, yeah, it's getting, like it's taking a lot longer to deal with them when there's just so much volume. Less dreadlock, less to maintain. And as far as manageability goes from a practical point of view, I find myself in the situation that they're getting so long that they're just kind of annoying in certain senses. Like, I'm sat on the bus, my dreadlock is also taking up my neighbor's seat. I can see the benefits to having them short enough to keep them within my own personal space, not hanging out with the guy sat next to me on the bus, on the train, falling over to the lecture desk behind me. I can see those practical benefits. Moving swiftly onwards, less dreadlock means less weight. As your dreadlocks grow longer, they do slowly get heavier and heavier. This is super noticeable when they're damp, and even more so when they're longer and therefore damp and heavier, and also damp and heavier for longer because they take longer to dry. So it just gets piled up and piled up. Long heavy dreadlocks can not only be impractical, but they can be straight up uncomfortable, and some people do have to deal with neck issues that may arise, and so trimming them off to a different length, losing some weight from them, it can temporarily at least make you feel like your head is floating away. Also, I think if your dreadlocks get to a certain length, you can find that they're slightly inhibiting in certain things. There are certain things that you may want to do where you feel that you can't because you just have so much damn hair. Yeah, it's something that you have to carry around with you at all times. So depending on your lifestyle and what you're doing, you might be like, well, I would like to do that, but my hair is just so long that it might be stopping me, or it just keeps my head so warm, or it just takes so long to wash and dry them afterwards. So just having them a little bit shorter, there's upsides there. And to balance off my previous statement that some people think that long dreadlocks are cooler, some people just straight up think that, what is this doing? Straight up think that shorter dreadlocks, or shorter is a relative term, but dreads of a certain length may hold more appeal to people than super long dreads. Some people just straight up don't want waist or knee or ankle length dreads, and that's super cool too. You've got to grow them for you and grow them to the length that you want, and not only that you can deal with, but straight up the length that you would like to have them at. There's no point just growing them for the sake of it. So I think those are my pros and cons. Some of them are going to hold more water. Some sort of pun intended there potentially for dreadlocks holding water. But some of these pros and cons are going to affect some people more than others. Some you're going to agree with, some you're going to disagree with. Got some alternate view? Do consider leaving a comment and tell me that I'm wrong, or that I'm right, or that you have a better idea. Do you have an ideal hair length in mind, or did you when you first started your dreadlocks? Did you start and have some sort of super long length in mind, and then as you grew them, you started to decide, maybe I want to keep them at a particular length, or the other way around? Did you originally envision short dreads and now you're enjoying the growing process? Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are on trimming dreadlocks to a particular length, or the opposite, refusing to trim. I hope this video was somewhat helpful to some of you. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Do consider a like, share, or subscribe, any of the particular YouTube things that people ask people to do. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and let's see you next time. Farewell.
I'm having trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Sorry? What? What are you talking about, phone?
Sorry for being obtuse.
Okay.